Hi, this is a video response to Multiverso Distópico's recent video where he talks about the influence of tabletop role-playing games on real-life social skills and social situations. I'm going to put a link in the description below so that you can watch that video. I recommend that you watch his channel as well because he brings out a lot of great content. It's in Portuguese but it has English subtitles. And it's always a pleasure to share my opinions and views on the content he brings out. He's always bringing out great topics. Well, social influence in concerning role-playing games. To me, it's quite tangible, quite easy to grasp that there is a very strong impact of role-playing games that modifies our way of interacting with others in real life. So, for example, you could pretty much say that role-playing games could not be made possible without social interaction. You could play a tabletop role-playing game as a solitary experience, but that's a completely different situation. The way that traditional role-playing games are handled, social interactions are a must-have, and they have a way to move into our everyday life even when we are not playing games. In his video, Multiverso Distópico talks about another video where a question was asked that if you prefer to play with close friends that weren't too much into role-playing games or weren't very skilled in playing a role and playing a game, or if you would prefer to play with strangers that were quite knowledgeable in role-playing games. I think this question is somewhat tricky, but at the same time, it's easy to answer if you consider why you are playing role-playing games. So, for example, in my particular case, I love playing role-playing games, but I also feel that every time I play with someone, I'm also getting enjoyment of establishing a sort of like healthy connection with that person, of reaching out and seeing how that person behaves outside of her normal persona-like outward exposition of her personality. So, for example, you could see a guy at work that is regularly somewhat dull or somewhat cold, like yes, kind of like a robot at times. But when you get that person into a role-playing game, there is a very good chance that you will see many aspects of that person that are quite surprising. So, for example, maybe that person plays sort of like a goblin alchemist bomber of sorts, and in game he's going to be like, I'm going to attack, and doing some kind of funny voice. But and then when you talk with that person, normally he goes back to the yes, I would be interested in playing that game. So it's quite interesting to see the way that people hide different identities or personalities, and they bring those identities to light during a role-playing game session. So in that sense, I think I prefer to play with people that I already know, but it's not a good idea to be so close that you will reject the opportunity of getting to know a stranger, perhaps not becoming a friend with that stranger, but getting to know a bit more about that person. And every friend that we have was at one point a stranger, so that's the way that you meet people. But at the same time, I've played role-playing games with people that weren't entirely strange to me. What I mean is that most of the strangers that I played with were usually the friend of a friend or the acquaintance of someone or someone at someone's job, so there was always like a subtle, almost transparent link between that person and me, that we had a mutual acquaintance, or he was a friend of a family member, etc. So they didn't feel that much they didn't feel like strangers too much. They just felt like people that I needed to get to know better. So I really cannot answer give a definite answer of if I would prefer to play with a stranger or with a friend. I would have an easier time answering would you like to play with a skilled role player that you don't like as that much, or that you feel somewhat uncomfortable with that person. That would be easier to ask, because for example, many years, well, not that many, like what would it be, 11 or 12 years ago, there was this group that of decently skilled role players, but I did not approve many of their things. Once I got to know them, it was somewhat impossible for me to look at them, at those people playing roles in games, without seeing the uglier sides of them exposed through their gameplay and their roleplay. Because, for example, this group of people had some very, let's call it, toxic ideals, and they also had like a very violent fight club. I think I mentioned this in one of my other videos. And these guys were trouble. They're basically trouble. I didn't connect with them, because even though they knew the rules of different role-playing games, and they had the notion of jumping into a personality, that is, if they could play as a neutral character, or a chaotic neutral, or even neutral good, etc. But it felt like they didn't really do it to connect with people, and they were kind of like just interested in playing a game without interacting with someone. It became somewhat mechanical in a way. This reminds me of some advice that was given in the Lamentations of a Flame Princess referee guide of the Grindhouse edition by James Raggi. He gives some tips on how to get players. But when you, for example, when you move into a new city and you don't know anyone, he gives you tips on, oh, you could post on online forums, or you could place some physical ads in a bulletin board or and such. And he tells you, oh, you're going to meet all sorts of people that you are not used to. You'll have to perhaps adapt to them, or if you don't like them, you should avoid playing with them, etc. But he basically gives you effective advice on how to get strangers into your game. But and he said you're not trying to become friends with these people. You just want someone to game with. But to me, it feels that approach feels a bit like gambling in Las Vegas. Maybe a lot of you have already gambled and you know the sort of like mood. And every time, the few times that I've gambled, it felt really artificial. I wasn't really satisfied. It just felt so mechanic that you were just there for some sort of entertainment, and some of them were there to win. But when the game was over, it just felt like an emptiness, like everything was too artificial. Again, that word kept coming to me, and I don't like that. I like role-playing game experiences where things feel organic, or perhaps a better way of putting it, more energetic. That there's a sort of like an energy. I simply cannot explain it. And when players gather together and they are laughing and they are having a good time, they establish like sort of like an energy field, to put it in a way. And you find a lot of enjoyment in that, and you form some sort of bonds with those players, to the point that even though the game is over, sometimes you find yourself asking them, oh, did you have fun at that party, or did you hit it off with that girl? And you create that sort of like a sense of warmth. So at least to me, role-playing games always feel like a fun way to connect with people. So that would be another way of giving an answer to the question of, do you prefer to play with strangers or friends? I would say that I prefer to play with people that could potentially be friendly. Even though they are not very skilled at playing roles, that can be, what would you say, fixed or improved with practice. Multiverso Distópico also talked about some negative experiences and some positive experiences playing with strangers. So, for example, he played with this group of Werewolf the Apocalypse players that were too much taking the spotlight away from others, and that's somewhat of a quite negative thing in my opinion, because I think that their ego or their sense of self or their character that they are playing, to put it in another way, they gave that their own character too much importance over the game. So usually you use your fictional personality to enhance the game for everyone and for yourself, of course. But when you're the only one feeding on all that, let's say, emotional investment or even time investment, it ruins the game for everyone. So that should be avoided. Remember, even if you have the a personality that kind of like a spotlight hug, to put it in a way that you want everyone to notice you, you must find a way to channel that attitude so that the others also get a spotlight, perhaps interacting with the other characters and finding a way to enhance the game overall. Then it's like that energy is not necessarily bad. This is turning somewhat of metaphysical topic, isn't it? Well, let's say that emotional investment should be used to enhance the game for everyone. Even if you want to you have an attitude like, look at me, look how my character is so heroic or everything, there are ways to redirect those that energy. And he also talks of positive situations. He even gives you a link to a video session that he had, and he had a positive experience playing with strangers, and I think that's a good way to show others that even though you don't know someone, if you have something in common, you could work on that to have a good time and perhaps find some other things in common. Even though that is not always the case, role-playing games, traditional role-playing games, usually give you a very solid ground to connect with others. Because, for example, let's say you play a science fiction RPG. When you play with another person that also likes sci-fi RPGs, you know that that person probably also likes sci-fi comics and books, and also likes to think about technology and the future. And maybe if it's a hard sci-fi game, maybe that person is somewhat more pragmatic at certain things or during certain approaches. But if you play something more like space opera with psionic powers and perhaps magic, you could also figure out that person is a bit of a romantic. So you can use role-playing games to find connections between you and the other players. He also, Multiverso Distópico also talked about his experience of how role-playing games affected different jobs that he had. Like, he was a waiter and he also an engineer at a construction site, and he drew inspiration and strength and confidence and a professional attitude from role-playing games, from those experiences, because role-playing games are simulations of reality. And you could say, well, if it's a simulation, there's nothing at stake and it's not that real. But I don't think it to be necessarily so, because, for example, and this kind of like intertwines a bit with my own experiences of role-playing games having an influence on my social life. As a martial artist, when I first started learning martial arts quite a bit ago, I had to do all these exercises and this sparring and the kata, that you know, those they're kind of like condensed choreography slash instruction manual of how to perform different moves and techniques. And I was never putting my life on the line during those moments, but there were moments later on in life that my life was at risk. And even though I had no real combat experience, I got through those times because I performed those simulations in the past. So I think it happens the same with the social situations. And throughout my life, let's say when I was 14 years of age, and after that, I got into different, let's say, doing different types of work and jobs. For example, because of different social services that school required me to do, I ended up in some places that were unexpected. I was working at one time at a warehouse in a store, and it wasn't like a very friendly environment. It wasn't entirely hostile, but I didn't feel comfortable. And I kind of like I imagined and remembered different situations in role-playing games, and I drew inspiration and courage from that. And when it comes to I also acted as a caretaker and a playmate for people with the Down syndrome, and that was also an unexpected experience. And again, I used the inspiration from role-playing games to adjust to that environment. And well, I think that the most tangible example of how role-playing games helped me quite a bit in socially, but at the same was during my college years, and when I was close to obtaining the black belt, in martial arts. So in college, I had to give a lot of like speeches and presentations, exposing things related to my thesis and such. And again, role-playing games got me a bit more into a talkative mood, to put it in a way. And when it comes to martial arts, it was required for you to give a certain number of classes of instruction to other students before gaining black belt. And it was somewhat of a new thing, because I kind of like expected that there would be different obstacles when doing so. I was always thinking, well, there are these many like rowdy students that are somewhat slightly violent, that were challenging others to fights to see who was better. And sometimes there were passers-by. If you were like giving a sort of like a class outdoors, or someone would try to like prove that he was the better man by trying to beat you up and such. So you had to have a very confident attitude. But I think that in that case, role-playing games and martial arts create a sort of like a feedback between and sometimes my martial arts training influenced the way that I played role-playing games, and vice versa. But role-playing games did have an important presence or influence over the way that I handled those classes. And later on, well, it became second nature to me to give martial arts lessons to others. So in general, I think role-playing games play a significant and important and positive part in your development as a social individual, because as humans we're constantly teaming up with others and communicating with others. Multiverso Distópico talks about how during his different jobs, he had to like team up or get along with people quite different from himself in different aspects. And that's also typical of role-playing games. There are many role-playing games where you have people of different professions or classes, so to speak, and of different races. So for example, you could have a centaur fighter with an orc rogue and a human caster, etc., and they all bring something to the table. The different aspects, different skills, different etc. etc. So role-playing games, it's just too tangible, perhaps even too obvious of how role-playing games have an influence on our social interactions, a positive influence in my opinion. And for those that are watching this video and well, are kind of interested in role-playing games but don't have players living nearby, or they consider different obstacles. And in this day and age, there are many tools to play a game with someone. You can play online, like watch Multiverso Distópico's videos, so that you can see some examples on playing through Google Hangouts. You could also start by playing by forum or by post. And you can always find players, and I think sometimes it's a fear of not knowing what to expect in a role-playing game session, of finding having a negative experience. Well, like many things, nothing is perfect in this world. You simply have to try it, and if you have a bad experience, don't let it discourage you. Maybe you didn't find the right group for you. Keep searching, or create your own group by learning how to be a dungeon master. There are many resources in videos on YouTube, many different books. And as I was telling you, it's a thing of not getting discouraged. This is easy to notice. If you watched my video of the introduction to the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons box set, I talk about my first role-playing game experience there. I'm going to put a link in the description below, and as you can see, it was far from perfect, but I didn't let that discourage me or put me off. I kept trying, and I eventually had positive social experiences with role-playing games. So once again, I think Multiverso Distópico brings out a great topic. I hope that that you found this video entertaining and perhaps informative, and I thank you for watching my video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.